good to go.
Awesome. Well, good morning, everybody. And I say good morning because most of the time Justin and I are recording in the morning here in Michigan. This is Brandon Molson and Justin Smith from Tracks and Sign, fired up this morning, talking all whitetail habitat, property management, QDM. So today we're going to carry off of or progress from our last podcast when we were talking about the recap of the season, some of the deer movement, and how we can potentially and hopefully capitalize on it in this next season. But a lot of work goes into it. So I'm joined here today with Justin Smith, and we're going to start with his family's awesome property in northern Michigan. Good morning, Justin.
Brandon Molson. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, we are fired up this morning.
Yeah.
So
don't be fooled by my monotone tone here.
Yeah.
It's,
so
Justin and I just got off of a pretty hardcore conversation about all sorts of things, and it always reverts back to. So we're going to talk whitetail today.
True story. Yeah. So if our tonality seems a little off, it's just a lot going on. And like you said, it always resorts back to whitetail deer, being in the outdoors.
This time of year, at least. In a month or two, we'll be talking all things turkey or fishing. So now to kick things off, Justin, you spent a lot of time in and how long have you had the property up there for now?
So going on if I'm not mistaken, this will be year number 8.
Wow.
Yeah.
In the first couple of years, you didn't hunt it, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So 2013, 2014, my dad found this, what we like to call our place, heaven on earth. And we decided that we were going to take those first 2 years, do land and habitat management. And so we hunted public land still up in northern Michigan, not around our property by any means. So yeah, we decided not to hunt because we wanted to see what type of activity, what type of deer. We wanted to see, obviously by adding food sources, what would, change in their daily habits. And yeah, so we decided not to hunt, and it was a phenomenal decision because go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, we didn't we literally had no idea what was on that property. So, we set up cameras obviously, and just, we initially just started with some very small food plots, some clearing. And, over those first 2 years, there were some big deer on those property. Big deer, big deer for Michigan anyways. I know down in Ohio, you see some freaks, Brandon, but there was some.
Well, no, there's some big boys up there too. And to put it into perspective, it's a nice chunk of land. With a road on one side backed up by public, several hundred acres of public back there. You've got a horse farm to the is it the west?
Yeah, the west. Yep.
And then most of the rest of it is government land, open to the public for hunting. And those first couple of years, there was a percentage of it is marshland. The front of it that's off the road has a nice separation between what you call your living quarters of the property, and then there's a wood line, and then there's it's not just 5-foot wood line, it's a decent sized wood line to the road. And so after that wood line, it seems like you expanded some ponds, you created some new ponds for fish, for duck or waterfowl, put up some wood duck boxes.
Yep.
There's bird feeder. There's all sorts of stuff. So it's not just whitetail. It's true habitat maintained.
Yeah, I mean about the bird feeders, it is insane the species of birds that we have in our property, not just waterfowl, but just bringing as much wildlife as humanly possible for what we, what the resources that we do have. And so,
Yeah.
yeah. And to your point about the wetland or marshland. So when my dad and I were looking at properties, they actually literally said that over 90% of this property was wetland. And it was also called the Rattlesnake Valley of Michigan. And till this day, I've yet to see a Michigan rattler. And after doing, some, not doing some, but doing a lot of work, we realized that, yes, there is definitely a lot of wet areas on the property, but majority of those areas have actually, the areas that we did clear has dried up because it hasn't seen the sun. It was completely just dense of foliage.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
and you and I aren't really trying to see them rattlers out there.
No,
of
hell
course
no.
they have their place, but Lauren, your girlfriend, she's out there literally trying to look for them in a place called that's named after it, and still has not found one yet. Correct?
Yeah. Nope. She has not either. And
wow. And a lot of people haven't bought that parcel because of what's been told about.
Yeah, literally. Yeah. So there was no immediate bloodline, left in the family tree of the previous owners, and then so it went into a trust, and then the payments or the purchase went into this trust, and it's actually used in the city. Those funds are used throughout. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
That's very cool. And so after a couple of years of doing some clearing really around the living quarters of the front of the property, and maybe a little bit in the back doing some food plot stuff. Tell us about, after doing observing and seeing what you're catching on cameras and some of the movement, the decisions that were made, because this is a long-term property, of course. You weren't looking to flip a property over in 5 years thinking it's going to be this deer, deer haven. But this is something that you're going to be on for generations. So talk to us about that thought process of where you start clearing, why, where were the deer coming from, etc.
Yeah. So beginning at the front of the property, when we first took the property, it had two very small watering holes, probably about, I don't know, maybe about 150, 175 away from each other. And the size of these things were probably 12 foot in diameter, were not big at all. So our initial thinking was, also on that property, there was a lot of ash borer trees. So we got rid of as many of those as possible in the front of the property. We noticed a ton of deer movement coming from, so across the road, so south of our property, right on the other side of the road, there is a very large deer camp with several hundred acres, and we noticed a crazy amount of movement coming from across the road. So we wanted to create, at least at the first half of the property, which is roughly about, hang on, if you give me a few seconds here. It's about 194 yards opening. And it's a pretty large circumference, but what we wanted to do was to get those deer that were coming from across the property, get them to a place where they felt safe, they felt protected, they had food. So we did a bunch of clearing, and then we actually had the ponds. They weren't even ponds; they were literally watering holes, and we connected them. So it was at that point 2 large ponds. So we didn't connect them right away. So we created much larger ponds where both of those watering holes existed, and then about a year later we had them connected, and we then didn't really do much to the property besides a lot of clearing. So we noticed a ton of those deer that were traveling from across the road. Now we're going deeper into the property, and then even going into north of us onto that state property. I am very confident that there are deer that, and I suspect are more bucks in the center of the property where they're bedding down. One of the things that,
and to this day, about the center of the property, that's mostly been untouched.
Correct. So
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this past year, so in 2020, we had some more work done to the property, and we actually had one of the contractors that we've grown to know, and just great family, good people. They came into the property, and he actually took a pretty large excavator through the center of the property, connecting several other 2-track roads that my dad and I did. And so now we have access to those areas of the property, but it was so wet and just our time constraints. So when that happened this year, it was probably like 2 months before bow season was opening. And so we
Mhm.
didn't really have much time to investigate or even explore, because at that point we're doing last minute, late season food plots, just prepping for several months of hunting. So we now do have access to that, and it's opened up so many more areas of our property that we literally have not exaggerating, not stepped foot on yet. So, coming, which, we mentioned in the last podcast, my dad and I and Brandon will be joining us, probably starting in February. We're going to try to get up there at least one day a week, to do some work. And, we're really excited to kind of see what's going on back there, because I'm certain there is a ton of deer movement. I mean, even this year, sitting in my blind, which is in the northwest corner of our property, there was a ton of activity coming down that trail that was created by the excavator. It's really thick back there. So it's definitely not a place where easy movement occurs. So that's why I'm thinking that they're still coming in from across the street. We definitely have deer bedding on our property, but we have a ton of federal state land around us, which is our goal now, is to get those deer to come through our property. Because this year when I was hunting, especially during bow season, and again, I've said this last podcast, but I've never sat or hunted in all my years hunting. I've never sat as much I did this year. And as grateful I am that my girlfriend got a deer, I did not harvest one. And the amount of deer that I seen on state property that I could not have taken a shot, even with a crossbow, due to down trees and brush and all that. But so many deer, like it was amazing, but also very frustrating. So now my head is like, okay, I know there's a lot of deer around there. So how do I get them, or how do we get them to come into our property, get them fed, and then, trying to understand their movement, exactly where they're coming from, which I believe I have a pretty decent idea. But it's more or less creating a strategy to get them to come in and, and spend some time.
So, excuse me. There's a few questions going around my head now. So, how wide did the excavators make those lanes?
Yep. So
or those paths going around the property.
Yeah. So it's 8 feet wide.
8 feet wide.
Yeah. Some areas may be closer to like 10 or 12, just because of some of the turns he had to take. But I would say about 8 feet. The size of his blade.
That happened right before, pretty close to the opening of bow. Prior to this, there were quite a few large bucks roaming around. You did catch a number of them on camera this year, but didn't see them in daylight shooting hours. So you might have bumped them off the property, and we're hoping for just the time being. So with that said, knowing that they had to go somewhere, and you have a feeling that there's at least one real big boy somewhere in the middle of that property, at least bedding, and a number of them back on that state land. How are you? Well, just talk about the thought process of how we're going to bring them back from where they were, or where they are now, and at least stay on your property as either a pass through or a supplemental food source.
Yeah. So considering what's around us,
instead of walking around your property.
Yeah. So considering what's around us, which it's more or less a ton of farmland, but the closest farmland to where we are is probably, I would say, a good mile of like corn. Like there's not a lot of farms around us that have ample food source that's close. And from, Brandon and I talking and just my understanding and knowledge, like the deer aren't going to travel that far to feed. So there's obviously around us some other type of food source, and there's acorns that fall in the fall. There's obviously we have food plots as well, but let's forget about those because those are essentially just they're not important right now because all the work that we've done is designed to start this year is to start funneling them in from state land. Brandon, you sit the north, like what would you say, the north, like you
northeast corner?
Yeah, northeast corner on
off the north. Yeah, north of the northeast corner of your property. And back there's that pine to hardwood to marsh transition. It's all like pretty close right there. And the first sit, when it was still green back there, I remember the first time you ever showed that to me, and you're like, listen, during hunting season, like this is all gone. So when we were talking about hunting season, we're talking about later hunting season, gun season and whatnot. But at the beginning of bow in Michigan, it's still green. And so you have those like 2-foot fern or just browse plant, just stuff that they're browsing, walking around as they're moving from pines to marsh or back over to the whatever fields are around your place. So they're eating that. But once that goes, like I at least didn't see them moving in those same patterns. Once that turns brown and falls to the ground, they're moving through that pretty quick, or they're going around on a mission to get to somewhere else.
Yeah. So the reason and thanks for sharing that, because the reason I bring it up is I think back in there, due to the transitions with the pines, the oaks, the marsh, I think majority of the larger deer are coming from back in there. So
yeah,
you hunt, if I had to, take a rough estimate, you probably hunt, I don't know, maybe 50 to 70 yards off of our property line onto that state land. Would you say that's a fair assessment, or do you think it's more or less?
What was it? About like 300, right around 300 to 400 yards from your stand?
Yeah. So from my stand to where you hunt, yep, it's just over 300 yards. And
with no trail to connect the two.
Yeah.
There's no way we're walking to each other.
Yeah. So the only trails back there are the deer, the deer movement.
Yeah.
Like they're, yeah. Game trails. Yeah. So I'm very confident that majority of those deer come from back somewhere in that area. So there's a couple options here. So my dad, he has what we call the deer motel, more towards off the eastern side of our property, which is about from there to where Brandon hunts is about, it's less, I know it's less than 300 yards, but I think it's somewhere closer to about 330, 340 from where Brandon hunts. And there's an interesting transition that happens. So, it goes marsh, pines, like really thick, dense woods, but pretty dry, opens back to marsh, opens up to a tree line, and then where you're at. So we're going to be doing a lot of clearing with that transition between the dense thickness or the really dense woods to that marsh where you told me that river went, where I found that goes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Brandon found this, I wouldn't even call it a river, found this.
Like almost an underground creek, but it's covered by like vegetation is built up over it. It's almost like a bog.
Yeah, literally.
Down. It's running water though.
Yeah. So, and I know where that runs into where my dad has a ground blind back in there, but all it is most of it's dead foliage. It's a beautiful area with different types of pines and just oaks, and so we're gonna do a ton of clearing back in there, create a food plot, and then where Brandon's almost directly just north of me, again like 300 yards, and so tapping into that new excavated 2-track, creating funnels, and kind of like we were mentioning earlier before we started recording, doing like a zigzag food plot somewhere between maybe, I don't know, 10 to 8 to 10 feet wide, and zigzagging that back until essentially the end of the property where we meet the state land. And I
So
know
they come onto the property and they have to go left or right.
Yep.
And then zigzag, and the reason for the zigzag is to make them feel protected.
Could be several reasons. It could be to protection. It could be to make sure they're making a move, so they have to essentially decide like where they want to go, and then obviously we're gonna have cameras set up back in there along the way to kind of have a better understanding about where they're moving, why they're moving,
and not just walk straight through the property.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like they're gonna have to make decisions and navigate. Because one of the things that I'm still very unsure of is, we do have some, I would say the past 2 years, we have neglected food. And although I'm seeing a ton of deer, those deer are not coming through our property to have, a snack or a supplement, meal. They're literally going around. And it makes sense, not only the amount of work that we've had done, but we haven't given food sources the right attention. And again, it's a clear as day. Like with all the sitting I've done, all the deer I saw, like they're just not coming onto the property. So, and there could be many reasons why, but I do believe the disruption, the work we've had done, and then the lack of food source. So our main priority this year is to create funnels for those deer to come, give them a reason to come to us, because it just isn't there right now. I mean, where we have where the cabin's being done and where the current, we have an RV trail where we've been staying in and where all the ponds are, that's green, deer out there all the time. I mean, we'll be out there in the afternoon literally doing work and they're out there grazing in the middle of the day.
Well, I love it because you're thinking, and we've heard it thousands of times. There's a guy that well-known whitetail consultant, Jeff Sturges. He talks about and been talking about it for decades. Deer eat 5 times a day, and the first 2 are pretty close to their bedding, and so they're getting up and they're kind of just browsing around on acorns or whatever's right around their bedding area. And then that third feed is, call it, about an hour before sundown. And so, and that's when they're moving, and that's when you would really want them to be on your property or passing through your property on the way to their main evening food source, because then they'll eat 2 times during the night. And so, by what you're talking about here is, you started off by saying they're coming from state land or they're coming from that deer camp across the road. And so essentially they'd be either crossing each other or, you're trying to get them to not go around your property, but be attracted and stay long enough to where one of your stands strategically placed can capitalize on that, either in the morning or in the evening.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, I should add something to what I'm most focused on this year. So besides creating ample food sources, I think being more strategic about where stands are.
Yeah. Where are they right now? How many do you have on the property?
4 right now. Yeah, 4. We have 4 stands right now.
What, your 2, and then the Deer Hotel, and then the ground blind in the back?
Yep. So the ground blind is between, where the ground blind's between where the Deer Hotel is on the other side of that initial, there's that small creek.
Yep.
Yeah, behind all the thick, and there's another marsh back. Yeah, it essentially splits the difference between where my dad hunts and where your area is.
Yep.
Yeah. And we know based on camera and videos that the deer are definitely going back towards, from my dad's area, which is where the Deer Hotel is. Their movement is definitely going towards that marsh, towards where the ground blind is back there by the federal state land.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I mean, it was funny. so the area that originally back, what was this? It was we were goose hunting, I think, and you came up there, and I was like, Brandon, I gotta go take you and show you this one place. And we talk about this on the mic, and it's interesting because when you try to explain these things and people haven't seen it, it's obviously difficult to imagine. But anyways, I took Brandon back to this area, and his reaction and his enthusiasm, like, it made me just so happy because it's beautiful. Like the transition, what's around the marsh, the thick pines, it's so green, and like it just makes sense that the deer would be back there.
Oh, I mean, it was
especially that time of year.
It's a
anyways.
natural place.
Yeah.
Oh, even like people will, and you go, and I was like, "Is this your property?" And you go, "No, this is what I hope our property looks like once we're done with it, or what we're working towards to get it to look like this." But to put into perspective, a lot of people spend like a considerable amount of time making strategic hinge cuts, like what called waist high hinge cuts on their property to add some side cover, and then they add near food plots, so then they're getting out, and those hinge cuts are used as bedding, and they're getting out of that, going 50 or 75 yards to food. And that is literally what this place is, but natural. Nobody's come back there with a chainsaw, but over time there's these trees that have fallen down and cracked, and they're placed, it looks like strategically.
Yeah.
And what would you say? It's probably like an acre spot.
Yeah,
like like a couple, maybe an acre or two that are just, it's like in the middle of this public land. It's a deer oasis.
It really it is. Like, I was so happy when you saw it, and you just got just as excited as I am, because
and then we found the creek. And
yeah,
it's just like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, you're right. It's not big. Yeah, maybe no more than like probably 2 acres. And it's just, you're right. Everything, the foliage that fell and all that, it's just like, wow, like, was this on purpose? Somebody had to have done this, And so, so getting back to the strategy of placing blinds. So something Brandon and I have been spending a lot of time, and not in just conversation, but just consuming content, is about, first of all, scent is a major component to hunting. I think it's probably in the top 3 most things that hunters should be concerned about, and also the wind. So strategically placing blinds in these new areas that we're working on. And, I would say Brandon is becoming a lot more knowledgeable of this, because from my experience, like, I've heard, for instance, if I'm up in a tree and I have to go to the bathroom, I've heard don't pee off your tree stand, or, don't, like, I can't tell you how many times I've been sitting in my stand all day, haven't seen anything. I get up, stretch, pee off my tree, have a snack that's not, quiet. And then all of a sudden I hear deer movement coming in. So I would say from my experience that I have not spent, as much time as I have been in the recent months, really trying to understand the importance of, covering I've understand the importance of covering your scent, but more or less the wind. And so this is why, Brandon, I'm really excited for you to be, helping out with this. Is I need to understand better. I need to learn and just be more fluent in where I should sit on any given day. Or maybe not even sit in that area, go sit somewhere else and leave that area alone until, a day or 2 later, when things are in more favorable of that sit in that specific area.
Well, think of your stand, and if they're coming from the north, there's a fence line behind your stand, right?
Yep. Yeah, it's probably,
and so if they're coming
20 feet behind me is where that horse farm, and then that's the fence so there's no fence that separates the horse farm from state land, but there is a fence that was there put many, many years ago, where it's directly behind me. Yes.
Yeah, but if you're bringing in deer from the north state land, and they're coming up into that north, let's call it a small food plot, making them turn left or right. Let's just say they turn right towards where your stand is, and then they have these little funnels of food, or just something to browse on as they're navigating through your property, and they make a turn in front of your stand. Well, you wouldn't want to hunt that with a north wind coming at them. One, they probably wouldn't be walking at your property necessarily if they're not going with the wind. All this is relative because I've certainly seen deer going with the wind. But
Right.
if you're thinking of it strategically, you're hoping that they make a turn. And let's say you have a south wind or you have you have an east wind, and so they make a turn. So now the wind's coming at them, and they're picking up everything from within your property. They're checking for doe, they're checking for other predators, animals, hunters, whatever the case may be. But you're just to the north west of them, and they're naturally turning with the funnel that you make right in front of them. That'd be an ideal place to sit if you had that kind of a wind. Now, if you had the opposite, where it's a north wind, you don't really want to be on the north side of a funnel because your north wind's taking your scent and blowing it down that side of the funnel. So maybe you would be on your dad's ground blind side, over there with a funnel in front of that. So now they're doing the same thing that they would be coming on your property, now hopefully turning left and swooping around towards and then heading south, and then you'll pick them up right in the ground blind.
Yeah. No, you're
Just
spot on. Yeah, no, it's a great thought. So I love hunting. Like, I love hunting from an elevation. So creating strategy around what Brandon just shared around. So there's this area, and what I'll do is I'll actually post a picture just to kind of give you guys an idea. There's this area right now.
Love the visuals.
Yeah. Yeah. Good old Onyx. So I'll post a picture just so you guys have a better understanding. But so being in the northwest corner, there's this area there's definitely some type of underground water movement that surfaces, go back under the ground. I'm not sure where it connects to. I'm not even really. I see where it starts visually, but it has to start somewhere else. But there's this large area of very, very, like, it's just dense foliage. There's not many alive trees. I think there's only about 9 trees that I'm saving in this area. But my idea right now is to clear this area and just plant all different food sources. And I have a couple ideas, but I think I'll have to wait a year or two to kind of see how the ground, because there's a lot of moisture, a lot of wetness back there. But from talking with Brandon, maybe that isn't the best idea right now. Maybe just creating these funnels, creating these little 8-10 feet zigzag food plots, trying to get them to come in from all areas of that state land. Brandon, I really, when we get up there, I really would like your feedback on that, because I'm not sure. All I know is there is a ton of deer back there, and I need to give them something to come in and graze on.
Well, you're talking about the ground, the property, the parcel primarily being, wet in areas. But once you started doing some clearing, a lot of it dried up.
Correct.
And so you hear a lot about, and we see this quite a bit when you're out there scouting or just hunting in general. When you're hunting around marshland edges, there'll be these, some people refer to them as fingers or peninsulas, just drier area or islands, ideally. Gosh, a dry island in the middle of a marsh.
Yeah.
There's like such a high percentage, if not as close to 100% of the time as possible, that's buck bedding.
Yes.
Not doe bedding, but bucks will be there. And if you have that type of habitat or environment in the middle of your property, one, let's set some cameras up and find where they're at least on the edges, and you can at least witness them coming in and out. And I know you have some cameras back there already, but maybe creating some sort of, if we could, some sort of dry area surrounded by marsh by doing some clearing. You're going to blow some stuff out, and it might take a period of time before they come back there. But once they realize that that's the dry area surrounded by marsh, and you leave it alone for some time, maybe put a cell camera kind of near there, and you're not even checking cards for a long time.
Yeah.
because, just going back to your camera, who knows what's going to happen. But if you do have the ability to dry up some areas and keep marsh wetland around it, that could be pretty interesting.
So from where I sit right now to where my original tree stand is about 160 yards away. And so I sat in my first tree stand, I sat facing south, and directly behind me for about 4 years of hunting this spot, I never saw one time did I ever, even on cameras or even when I was sitting, did I ever see a doe come from this area behind me. So I know for a fact there is definitely some buck bedding going on back there. And the cool thing about it is if you're facing south to the, what would be the south, so to the west of that, there is high, like, not this beautiful island that, I'm imagining when you're talking, but there is definitely high ground with green vegetation back there. Yeah. So but the thing is we haven't been able to really, I just know it's there from just, briefly, doing some investigating, but we haven't even been really to access back there. So this new excavating trail gives us an opportunity to come from the back end of there and come in and see what's going on. And you're right. I we're going to be doing a lot of work, between now and hopefully the end of spring. We should be, fairly, tightened up. But the thought of doing all this work and then there's this anxiety of like, maybe I'm going to do the same thing that I've been doing for the last few years, is bumping these guys out of here. Because although I saw the deer moving around me, we didn't have a ton of deer movement like on the property. It is frustrating.
Yeah.
So it's so frustrating.
Well, I know we're running out of time with this podcast, but the next one that we do. So today we talked about what we saw during season and prior to this last season, some of the changes that were made on your property up there, and what we're hoping to achieve in this next season and season to come, and also some stand placements. But for the next podcast, taking all that in consideration and now talking about how you can strategically access these stands after figuring out where they need to be placed, and then creating the funnels and whatnot, all that in consideration without bumping where the bedding is or putting ground scent places where you don't want to, could make for a great next conversation. What do you think?
Oh yeah. No, I look forward to that conversation. And
the planting involved, the clearing, everything, the avoiding.
Yeah.
What were you gonna say?
No, I just, talk while we're talking about all this, your brain just kind of moves because you're just like, seriously, like, I just want to like head up north right now and start working. But it really, it is something that, like, there's definitely science behind it. And so I know myself, I need to be more acclimated with all of that. So that's something I'm definitely spending time doing right now, because I think we're at a very, like, I don't want to be too dramatic, but a very like pivotal moment in our land, because we've had some work done. We have access now to certain parts of our property that we never have. Now it's time to like strategically figure out, okay, long-term wise, how can we get these deer back on the property? So the conversations moving forward, I'm looking forward to. I mean, I try to talk about this stuff as best as I can. It's something that is, I wouldn't say new to me, but the amount of time that I'm spending trying to understand it all is very new. And so, Brandon, I'm grateful for you and your knowledge, and I'm looking forward to your help. And, I appreciate you introducing me to a lot of other people that just know a lot more about all of this stuff that we're talking about.
Well, that's the name of the game. Keep that network growing, keep learning, never stop. And hopefully we can have some very successful hunts, now and in the future.
Yeah. And we're also, Brandon, coming up too. I definitely want to pick your brain about what you're going to be doing down in Ohio. As much as I would love to talk about my property all the time, there's a lot of other things happening. So I look forward to having that conversation as well, because being that I got to spend some time down there, understand it more, I'm like, my mind is still blown about the terrain, and the possibilities, especially where you're currently at and what's around there. So that'll be definitely a part of this conversation as well.
Absolutely. Anything, I'm fired up about both our properties here and the opportunities we have. Anything else? Any last thoughts before we wrap up?
No. So be sure to, follow us on social. We're Tracks and Sign. Also on our YouTube. I'll post the links in the bio. Unfortunately, we're not at a place where we can have a customized domain, but we will get there in good time. This is all new for me and Brandon. We're excited to at least, speak about it, and we would appreciate the support if you could check us out, give us a thumbs up, follow, like, and Brandon, I'm good.
Yeah, and let us know how we can support you too. We have some associations that we're actively supporting, but would love to return the love. So let us know how we can get involved or support you or boost you. Either direct message or email us at fishhuntfind@tracksandsign.com.
Boom. Yeah, we all need more love right now.
All right, Justin. Hey,
Brandon.
Appreciate the time today. Great conversation. Until next time.
Yeah, likewise, sir. Thank you.
Take care, buddy.